Hey guys, I want to show you how to use the trimmer to make a flyer. And this technique can be used for other types of printed material as well, like business cards, postcards, invitations, things like that. So this is the final product that I want to create. And this is on a 60-pound cover. And the final size is a 4" by 7.5". And that's important information to know for a few reasons. Knowing the final size is going to help to make sure that I trim all of the printouts to the correct size. And the thickness of the paper is important because depending on the equipment that you're using, you have to know how many sheets you can trim at a time so that you can get a good quality out. And so with a 60-pound paper, it's a heavyweight paper, so I could really only do about 2 at a time. If I was using a 20-pound bond paper, which is like your regular copy paper, I can probably get about 5 or 6 and do 5 or 6 at a time. So in this case, I would just do 2 at a time. So this is what the printed artwork looks like. Okay, so what I showed you before, that's the final product. So this is the artwork, and you can see it's set up, it's configured as a 2-up print file, right? 2-up basically means 2. If this was a business card file, it might be a 10-up, right? So there'd be 10 on a page. The important thing here is the crop marks. So you can see the trim marks in the corners there. And these are really important because these are the guides that I'm going to use to trim. So I'm not going to keep taking measurements as I'm going. I'm just going to use the trim marks. But I will need the measurement at the end, and you're going to see why, which is why it's important that you know what the final size is. If ever you're not sure because somebody gives you this to trim and they didn't tell you what the final size is, that's no problem. It's really easy. You just grab a ruler and you measure between your trim marks. So that's 4 inches, and the height is 7.5. So I know that my finished piece, which is this, is 4 by 7.5. Yeah, just by measuring in between the trim marks, because the trim marks is where you're cutting. So it's logical that if you cut on those lines, that's the size that you're going to end up with in the end. Right? So I'm going to open up the clamp and start getting ready to cut. So a couple of things I want to bear in mind is I want to make sure that my paper is up against this little wall here, because that's going to ensure that I'm going to make a perpendicular cut to this, basically a straight cut. If you go somewhere in the middle here, there's a chance that it might get a little bit misaligned. There are grid lines here that you could follow, but it's not really reliable because it can move as you're lowering the clamp and things like that. So just put it right up against here, and then you're going to want to line up along one of the any edge of a trim mark. It doesn't matter what side you start with, you're just going to start on any side. So there is the blade is in here, right? It's underneath there, you can see it if you were to look closely, and it runs along this plastic edge here. So that's your cutting point. So you're going to want to line up your trim marks to be along that point. So I've got them there. I'm going to close this, depress it gently. You don't have to go very hard once you know the blade is still sharp. And that's it. So you just press it down gently till you cut across. And of course, it usually falls on the floor, and we're going to pick that up at the end. Right, so there's my first cut done. Now, your second cut, you always want to go perpendicular on your second cut. Don't flip it all the way around, because if you do that, you're basically eliminating all your side crop marks, and you are going to need those. So your second cut is always perpendicular to your first one, and that just basically means you're going to rotate your paper 90 degrees. So now I'm going to line up again to my trim mark and make sure that I'm square against this edge here, clamp down, and cut. Okay. So now I've made 2 cuts, and I need to decide where am I going to make my third cut. And that's actually a really important place to just stop for a second and have a think. So if I were to cut along the top here, okay, you can see I've got these really nice trim marks. I can cut them off, but then what happens is I'm cutting off as well these vertical ones, and these vertical ones are the ones that are telling me where this needs to be cut. So I don't want to get rid of these trim marks at the top. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to start going vertical, right? So I'm going to use these trim marks here, and I'm going to end up with my pieces. So let's do that. So now what I have is 2 identical pieces, and it almost looks like I'm done, but I'm actually not done. So I know that I haven't done that top cut. So then it's super easy, and this is where it's important to know what the final size of the piece is. So now, actually I can do these together because they're identical. So I'm going to put these in here, and I'm going to just go to the 7.5 inch mark, and that's where we use the grid. The ruler, right? That is on the working surface, and that's it. So I'm going to trim off this excess piece there, and then I've got 2 identical pieces.